Welcome back, my dear champions. So what are we going to do today? We're going to get started with what's left in Django. Today's class is going to be very important as we are going to learn some logical things with cookies and session management by today. Okay. And before we get started, so we'll have to take a look at what we have achieved so far. And to do those, so we are going to create, let me go to the VS Code, and this is the code, and let me make sure the server is running. So let me go ahead and use 127.0.0.1 8000, right? Okay, so we're having 404 error right here. So let me login, and we have this login here. Please write a username and password. Incorrect username and password. So we have the correct username and password. Maybe correct username is NID and password is password. So we get redirected to the profile page. Now the first things first, I want to, let's say, about prohibit, right? What if I want to prohibit anonymous access to my profile page? So if I go to profile, now take a look here. What is happening right here is we are actually taking data from the session, and if there is no session, so we're handling the exception, and we basically are showing anonymous right here. So now let's inspect element, go to application cookies, and let's delete a cookie, and we're getting hello anonymous from the profile page. So now you can clearly see SESS takes anonymous if there's an exception. When is the exception going to happen? Only when there is no session, when the session has not started, right? So when is the session going to start? Only when you log in, when NIIT and password matches, you're starting a session. And now what is a session? It requires deep analysis. We'll do that analysis by today. So there will not be any problem in analysis, right? So first let's do one thing right here. Let's say that, hey, if the session has not started yet, right? So you mind if you actually do something dramatic for me, or we can say take me back to the profile page. For example, if the session has started, right, if there is no exception, you return the profile page. And if the session has let's say about not started, I'll keep the message here. SESS will take a message, you are not authorized to visit. All right, so we'll have this message being displayed, you're not authorized to visit, but we'll take him back to login.html, right? So here we're taking him back to login.html if there is no session. So let me refresh. So now there is no session at all, right? So session has not been created. Getting a type of error right here. So what is the error? Maybe indentation. Yeah, it has to be inside the except block, and this has to be inside the except block. Right then, so there's no indentation error. If I go to profile, now you can see you are not authorized to visit. Actually, I'm visiting the profile page. I clearly see, but I get back to login and say, hey, you're not authorized to visit. Now, if I log in correctly, right, so you are going to get redirected to the profile page, and let's say NIIT and password is password. In that case, if there is no let's say about if there is no exception, if the session is started, right? If the session has started, so you go and render your request to profile.html, and you sesh is going to take the session. All right, so it should work. So let me restart the server and try again. If the server starts, okay. So I'll say NIIT and password is password. So profile has some kind of an error. So let me see post profile HTTP. So method not allowed. So post method is not allowed. So I'm not firing the post method, to be very frank. Right, so I'll say accept exception as E. So let me catch this exception as E. I'm not using it, but yeah, still. And if there is no error, you go to profile.html and carry a message as SESS. Yeah, its variable E is not being used, so we'll not have it because we're not using it, right? Alright, so let's go to profile. You're not authorized to visit an IIT, and let's say password is. Password should be able to get it now. There should not be any error, right? Well, I suppose it should work. So we're not doing post right here. We're not doing post back. We're handling it here. And this is class-based view that we have learned in the previous class. In case I reckon if you directly jumped into this class, you should rather go back, all right, and try the previous lecture, watch it, understand it completely. So let me just restart my SQL completely and then come back and see this class. So we'll say login. You're still getting you're not authorized. Just a moment, so maybe the server has stopped. Yeah, there are many methods that were in the queue, so I'll run the server again. Alright, so I'm running the server back and let's try again. Okay, this is your profile. What? Go to profile. If I go to login directly, please write a username with a password. So I write username with a password PSWRD, and I get redirected to the profile page. So that's absolutely fine. So this thing is working absolutely fine. So well, now if I delete the session, right, and I go back, yeah, I go back, I'm thrown out. You're not authorized to visit. So profile has no post system because you have to log in from the I'll do one thing right here. Instead of redirecting the render, why don't I try just a moment, why don't I give post right here? What's happening on post? Right, so post is in accounts class, and this is basically, it does not have any post. Profile does not have any post at all. So instead of redirecting the user, why don't I do something like we did just a moment. In login, maybe we are actually redirecting. So I'll say return redirect rather than return render. So I'll say done. So I'll say return the redirect, and it does not take any, maybe it may take some message. It does not take request and anything like that because we're redirecting the user back to the login.html page. So I'll have to use return redirect like this. Okay, let's see if I go to profile directly. Okay, if I go and return it directly, it does not take any message at all. Alright, so let's try now. If I go to profile, we have some kind of an error, invalid syntax, login.xhtml. Why? Return redirect. So I'm returning the redirect, so that there should not be any problem like we're returning it here. Should not be any problem. Return redirect back to login.html. So is there any error? No, there should not be any error. Let me go back to login. Login is working absolutely fine. If I go to profile without having a session, I get an error. Alright, so instead of login.html, ml, I'll go to login. Because login is already defined, so we'll try login. Okay. Instead of login, we'll try login. Okay. So if I try and go to profile directly, I'm redirected back to login. If I try and go to profile directly, I'm redirected to login. And can we carry request here? request request. We'll have to see. Does not carry request in redirect. Because it takes args, and if I go to profile, yet there is no reverse profile, so we'll not be able to do this. And how will you be able to display the message then? Alright, we need to display the message, so I'll show you how to display the message after at the end. So if I go to profile directly, I'm redirected back to the login page. Now you can clearly see this, and now if I log in and I just give password hello and ID from profile page, even if I take this profile page to second tab, it actually works. Hello and ID from profile page. Is that clear? Yeah, it's absolutely clear. And now if I go to profile again like this, so it does not do anything bad. But if in case I delete the session, or if the session is not started, alright, let's say, but I'm deleting the session right here, that means login has not happened. Someone is trying to view my profile directly without login. You are actually redirected back to the login page. Profile, you're redirected back to the login page. That's point number one. And point number two, how actually it works is, let me explain. I've already designed a graph for you right now. You can clearly see it's all about session. Now what is a session? Session means you go and meet your client. What do you do? You're there for a session. Right? So session requires consent of both the parties, right? So if you decide to meet your client or your boss or anyone else in a restaurant, right? So you fix that time and then you both come. That means there is agreement of both the parties, the server and the client. So let's consider this to be a session, or in other language, if we talk of web application development using a web server and a client, a communication that starts between a web server and a client, right? It is, now we can say session is basically a communication between a web server and a client, and it is for authorization and authentication purposes, right? Now why do you require a session? As I said, I keep on saying this, I said it 200 times, that HTTP is a stateless protocol. It does not remember states, right? For example, if I log in, right, and what I get here is hello NIIT from the profile page. Where is this NIIT actually coming from? You can see it's not coming from anywhere, right? So there's no get parameter, there's no post parameter, it's coming from the session. That means there's no other way to make this profile page remember this name, right? Because HTTP is not meant to remember the states. So in order to maintain the state, you have to use something explicitly. And here what we use sessions, right? And we use it to maintain the state of a page throughout the application. Now what is throughout the application? That means you can go to any other page like about, right? If it is there, you can go to page contact if it is there, right? And you can go to the following page. And in that case, if a session has started, you can fetch this name from the session. And now where else is session used? Session is used in a shopping cart. You keep on adding items to the cart. Where do they go? You can either use a table, or you can use an application state or a session state to maintain the state of the page. It's not like a software or a mobile app wherein the state of a page is easily maintained. No, HTTP does not allow us to remember the states. We'll have to explicitly remember them. And it's very good, right? Remembering states is also very good. Otherwise, anyone could log into anyone's profile. I may log into the Gmail account of Sundar Pichai, and I may email you from his account if authorization is not a question. Right? So authorization and authentication is very good, considering the security and the privilege, right? Let's consider this example. What actually happens in session? You know that HTTP is all about request and response. You send a particular request, you get a particular response. Before getting a response, you get a response code. For example, if I go and try facebook.com, something like this, I get a response code. Now you can clearly see, okay, I'm getting a new tab here, I don't know why. Alright, so maybe FFFF is, it does exist, so I'll try something that does not exist. So what we are seeing here, two kind of responses. One response that the page does not exist or the link is broken. We call this response as 404. Now you can clearly see response codes. First, a web server responds us with a response code. Right? In our case, it responded with 404, and here when the content actually was displayed, right, FFF, the content is actually displayed, someone's profile and someone's cover. So this actually is error 200, not error, it's basically the response code 200 means okay, now serve the content. Content can be video, image, text, anything. So 500 error is for a server error, like we used to get it, and we get it quite often. And bad request that you're not authorized to get. 400 means if you're trying to access without the token, CSRF token, that we are completely aware of. Alright, so we are aware of CSRF token right here. So I already explained it in video number 3 or 4. So that is the case in case if you're trying to access, if you're trying to execute cross-site request 4G, so you get error number 400. So every request has a response code, and every code has actually a response. So it's a duty of a web developer, right, to handle both the request and the response. And it is also duty of a web application developer to secure the request and the response. To only take valid requests and give valid responses, you cannot take illegal requests and give valid responses. And as a professional web developer, it is your duty to give response, as you can say, in a user-friendly manner, by having displayed user-friendly message, like we're displaying it. Like if I go back to the login page and I say login, so this is the request. I'm requesting to log in, but I'm giving response here. Please write a username and password. Right? It's a user-friendly message in response. Now I write username and password. Incorrect username and password. It's again a friendly response. Okay? So, as a good and best web developer, you have to understand that you don't only have to give response, you have to handle it. You have to handle the request and the response, right? So this is where we act as interceptors ourselves. We have to intercept the user. Hey, user, what are you trying to do? Right? You have to intercept it, right? Are you trying to do good? Are you trying to do bad? And one of the best interceptors that we use, right? Hey, user, if there is no session, if there is no login, right? If there is no login, there is no session. And in that case, I am giving you response. I'm throwing you back to the login page. I may not be able to allow you. You can see the response, right? If you go directly to the profile page, I'll throw you out and you go back to the login page, and this is what happens. Right? This is what I tell the web server. I force the web server to do that, and that is where we're handling it most probably very well. And how are we handling it? We're handling, if there is no login, there is going to be an exception because you're trying to fetch something out of the session, and that goes to this variable SCSS. If there is no session, it's going to create a runtime exception. This code is going to run, and if this code runs, you're saying that SCSS you're not authorized. I'll show you how to basically display this message, but you're redirecting user back to the login page. Right? This is where you're acting as professionals because you are giving a proper and a valid response back to the user. Right? Hey, right? And this request and response is actually handled by a session right here. So that means it is actually handling it out. It's actually handling it out with the help of a session. Okay? All right? So this session is actually what actually it should do. It should actually, let's understand the operation of the session first and then see what it does here. So now what happens? We have a client and have a server. It's all about request and response of the session. Okay? It's about the request and the response that basically is handled. A client comes and he writes something, he requests, and he gets a valid response. And now in that case, if the response and request is related to a session, what happens as soon as you log in, a session is created in the memory of the web server with a particular session ID. Every session had a GUID, which is a globally unique identification number. Right? It's basically a globally unique identification number right? And this session ID is actually saved in the memory of the web server, right? So as soon as you start the session is saved in the memory of the web server, and you get the response, right? And you are authorized, maybe, or you're trying to fetch something out of the session. Like I go back to profile, I'm not getting it, but now if I log in, here, I get hello NIT from the profile page right here. So this is the response that I'm getting. But now if I refresh, I take it to another tab, right? I get the same response. That means I don't have to log in again. Now second time, what is happening? How is the session responding for the second time? And for the second time, you know that HTTP request, right, has request headers. And one thing in the request header that the request header takes along with itself, right, to the session, to the web server, right? If the session is started, the session is started and saved in the memory of the web server or in the temp directory of the web server, and some servers take it to the database, right? And not only there, session ID is actually saved in the temp directory of the client as well, right? You can clearly see this session is saved in the temp directory of the client as well, and that is what is known as cookie, right? Sessions use cookies. Does session variables use cookies? If you get this question, yes, they do use cookies. What are cookies? They are temporary piece of data. Cookies are temporary piece of data in a form of text file. I repeat, in a form of text file. I haven't written it here, right? That is set inside or saved inside the client temporary directory for authorization and monitoring purposes. I repeat, what is a cookie? Cookie is nothing but a text file. It's a temporary piece of data that's set inside client computer for authorization and monitoring purposes. Now, what types of cookies do we have? We have two types of cookies. One is persistent cookie and another is non-persistent cookie, right? What persistent cookie does, persistent means persist with timings. Remember my session for a specific time period, maybe 3 months, 2 months, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, right? This is how we can remember session right here. And non-persistent cookie is actually destroyed as soon as you open the browser, right? And then what you do, you log into some URL, and when you close the browser, the session is destroyed. So as soon as you close the browser, the session is destroyed. That's non-persistent cookie. That means the session is using a non-persistent cookie. And if you can see that there are many websites. If I go to yahoo.com, right, and if I show you yahoo.com, if I show you this, I'll go to the sign in and I'll hit the sign in button, and you may see that stay signed in. Some websites have this stay signed in, right? If I don't click here, I'm creating a non-persistent cookie. If I click here, I'm creating a persistent cookie, right? If you click the remember me button of Facebook, Facebook is going to remember your cookie for maybe 18 months is what Facebook is setting cookie for, right? And stay signed in here maybe have some time. That means even if you close the browser, when you come and log in for the second time, the cookie is remembered and you are logged in. So this remember me or stay signed in checkbox, if checked, creates a persistent cookie. If not checked, creates a non-persistent one. Is that okay now? Okay. Now what are we going to do right here? Is try and understand what happens for the concurrent requests. For example, if I go to my profile facebook.com, first time Facebook is going to ask me login, and now once I log in to my Facebook account, right, if I go to home and I click home, or if I click create, right, and I do create a page, right, I go and create a page, I move to this page, I don't have to log in again, right? Why isn't this? Why don't you log in for the second time? What is happening at the back end? So what happens at the back end is the second time when the session is created in the temporary directory of the web server. Also session is created in the temp of or temporary directory of the browser and the operating system of your computer. So second time when the request goes, every request will take this session in the HTTP header. That means the request headers will carry also the session along with the browser and other informations. It will take the session and match the session as that of the web server. If the session does not match, that means if it is deleted here, right, it does not match. If it is deleted in the temp directory of the client, it does not match. What happens at the end of the day? The end result says the session does not match, and you get this response that you have created. In our case, if I do not delete it in the web server, if I go and delete the session from the temporary directory of my computer, I go to application and I delete the session ID right here, and now you can see I have created a specific type of response. If the session is not there, I'm throwing the user back to the login system. That means this time what happened when HTTP header sent request to the web server, right? A web server responded in a specific manner that no, session ID does not match, right? It is creating an exception because the session ID does not match. I repeat for the final time, what is a session? It is basically a handshake. It's a communication that takes place between a web server and a client for authorization and communication purposes. Why do we use sessions? To maintain states of page, to maintain a state of a page throughout the application. Does session variables use cookies? Yes, session variables do use cookies. There are two types of cookies that session variables may use. One is persistent cookie, another is non-persistent cookie. Persistent means persists with timings, just like I gave you an example of remember me or stay signed in checkbox. And non-persistent cookie is actually destroyed as soon as you close down your browser. That is what session is, and this is how session actually works in nutshell. And let's go back to VS Code and see what we can do with this code again. Okay, now you can see that we have hard-coded. So this is not hard-coded here. Even I can say this is hard-coded. You should have a separate business service. This is not how component-based programming works. You're professionals. You're not learning a crash course. You're not going through a crash course or a crash program. The component-based program means that every software has different type of modules, right? So you can see that this is the big one is the software, and the smaller ones encapsulated inside are modules. Right, so there are two basic things that you'll have to understand and remember forever, right? And those two basic points are coupling. We have coupling and we have cohesion. Now, what is the definition of coupling and cohesion? They are very, very important points of software engineering. Right? If software engineering is not actually developing an application, software engineering is actually architecting an application on the paper. Right? Documenting a software is actually what software engineering is. Rest is software development, right? Now, what is a couple? It's not that couple, right? It's coupling and cohesion, right? So now let me define coupling and cohesion upstairs because I may have to delete this. Let me take it a bit down and let me try and explain it in brief, right? So what is coupling and what is cohesion? Right? So coupling refers to how, or we can say coupling refers to we can say the INT, interdependence, right, between modules, right? And cohesion, how tightly modules are tied together, right? So cohesion is used to indicate we can say degree which a class has a single, or we can say it is how tightly actually it refers to an interdependence of the module. That means let me just explain it to you. For example, we have an ERP that we are developing, online solutions, ERP solutions we are developing, and we have a fee module, right? And we have a salary module, right? And we have bus fee module, right? And we have let's say we have training fee module, bus fee module, we have a bus fee module, we have a salary module, we have a fee module, and we have accounts module, right? So let's say that we have 4 modules. So programming should be, if you're doing high-end programming, it should be on the basis of low coupling and high cohesion, right? So it is something like that. Or we can say, what is high cohesion? First of all, high cohesion means keeping parts of code bases that are related to each other in a single place. That means the cohesion should be low. Alright, so it means how basically cohesion means how tightly modules are tied together. So you can see if I now tomorrow go and delete the salary module, it should not impact fee, bus fees and accounts module. If I delete bus fee module, it should not impact fee, salary and accounts module, and vice versa. Right, so that is coupling. How tightly they are coupled. That means high cohesion means low coupling, right? And high we can say low cohesion means basically high coupling, or the vice versa, right? So we can say I'll just give you more examples of coupling and cohesion as long as the software engineering is concerned, right? So basically it's basically related to the design phase of the software, right? And I'll tell you this. Coupling is basically dependence between the modules. I told you coupling is how they are dependent, right? And cohesion is measurement, or we can write it down, how tightly modules are tied together, or the measurement. You measure right? We can say it is the measurement of the degree to which the elements of the module are tied together. So it describes the degree to which the elements of the module are tied together, right? Okay, so you're right. There should always be low cohesion and high coupling, right? So now, in order to achieve that, we cannot hard code it. This is all hard coding here. There should not be any if and else statements here. It's hard coded, and it's actually against the least principles of object-oriented programming. Okay, all right. And let me take a time. Do we have time? Yeah, we still have time. We can do this. I know this class may be a bit longer, but it's very important class. As I said, it is going to be very important. So let's basically start with the basics of object-oriented programming. What we'll do, the first things first, right? Now, what we are going to do is, let me see. Let me go and make accounts controller, right? So, and let me go and first make a model. Right, I'll go to model. So I know that my application is travel, and I will go to have this model somewhere. There's models of my application. It should be there. It's travel, and this is my travel app actually. Alright, so I created this folder, business services. I'll again show it's already created, so I'll just delete it. And we have this file. In the travel app, we have a file known as models.py. It says create your models here. So I am going to create some member variables, and I'm going to indent them first of all. I will create a class, CLASS. Class is a class keyword, and I name this as users. What's a class? It's a template that we're creating. And the class has some member variables such as ID. What is the type of ID? It's integer. And we have F name. What is the type of F name? I'll say it is string. L name as a last name, as in last name is string str. And I'll create another username, and I call this as string str. And I will create a username, and let me create password as str. Let me create message. Why message? I'll just tell you, error message or user defined message. So my model is completely ready. I'll save this model and check it for errors. Sorry. Now I will go to my travel app and create, what did I do? I'll go to my travel app. Where's my travel app? Right here, and I will create a new folder, business. I call this as business services, and inside business services I will create a new file and I will call let's say about this file as accounts controller, maybe, who knows. Yeah, let's call this as accounts. I call this as accounts controller. So now let me start. Now I'll call this as class. Let's say about ACCOUNT. So the class is going to be accounts. All right, I will just save this. Okay, I forgot to mention .py extension, accounts controller.py, because extension of Python is py. And now I will define certain functions. First function is going to be isValid, and this function will check whether the object that is being passed, I just call this object as users, the object that's being passed to this class is actually valid or not, because we already have inside a model class user. So I'll accept the object of users. Users already has a first name, last name, string, and everything. First name, last name, username, password, and message. So instead of passing all the variables, I pass the object. That's the first thing I do. Instead of passing variables, I pass the object. Why? Because we're dealing in object-oriented programming. Alright, I'll say pass, and the second function that I will define is authentic. Now what this does is also accepts one argument that's of type users, and third, what is going to encapsulate. So I'll define a function to log in. Everything does its own job, right? So call this users and I'll say pass. Okay, so now we have three functions, 1, 2, and 3. This function is to encapsulate both of them, right? Let's start with isValid. I'll say if users dot let's say about user name, right, is not equivalent to empty if user has entered something, and if user dot password is not equivalent to empty. In that case, what do you got to do? What is user dot username and user dot password? If you go to the model class and you can say users dot username, users dot password, right, it happens like this. And if they are actually empty, what do? I will say or return false, right? And before returning false, what you got to do is users dot message. We already have users dot message member variable here. I'll say is equivalent to. If it is not equivalent to, no, we're doing it wrong. If it is not equivalent to empty, that means it has, user has written something, so we'll return true. Else, if it is empty, right, I will return false. And before returning false, I would like to give a message as well, and the message is going to be, right, please write a username and a password, right? So this is the message that I'm going to give back, right? Here we are fetching, and here we are actually assigning, right? USERS. What does it say? Users. So we have to use self. I forgot that we are inside a class, and we have to carry on with this self here, right? Because we are inside a class. This is the method. Method requires self, and if it's a function without class, it does not require self at all. Self means basically an alias of this. Self means actually this class, right? So the function is done. So the job of this isValid function is done. Now authentic is going to check for if users dot username is equivalent to, we'll hard code it and then connect to the database, and if users dot password is equivalent to password, hard coding it here, but we will go to the database and then fetch it from the database. And if they are equal, we will say return true, right? In that case, if it is not, right, I'll say else. What you got to do is return false, but before returning false, what you got to do is set the message, which is the following message: users.mess users.message is equivalent to incorrect username or password. Is that true? And that's done, right? So now the job of this function is done, right? Interdependence, there is no interdependence. This is doing its own job, is valid, is checking whether the username and password is valid, and authentic is doing its own job for checking whether the username and password is authentic. And login is actually encapsulating, because it's all about object oriented, it's about encapsulation, it's about inheritance, it's about polymorphism, right? It's about abstraction. So we'll apply all the rules here. So I'll say if. Now I'll call self dot is valid. I will first check, because this is the function that's called outside. Login will be called outside, and right, login will check when once you call login from outside the class, it will check if and pass the user's mode. If it is valid, means if is valid function returns true. In that case, what you got to do is this, and if it does not, what do you want to do? I'll not have else, because else is already defined here. So I'll say if the function returns true, go and check is if self dot is authentic. First check if valid. Valid means if the user has entered username and password, they are not blank. Alright, authentic means that it matches an ID and it matches password, username and password matches. If that so, you have to pass users. Why? Because you will call this function login and pass users object. When this login function calls is valid, we know that is valid is already going to accept users object, right? You have to pass, and authentic also accepts the object of users. You have to pass it. If it accepts, you have to pass it. And in that case, what you got to do, if this authentic, if it's authentic, I will say in that case, I will define another function right here, and I will call that function as authorized. So I'll say define define this function as authorize, authorize. This also accepts one argument, that is users. And what this authorize function actually does is this function should return. This function should start a session. So I'll just say pass, and we'll start a session here, right? If everything is fine, if it's valid, okay, and then if it is authentic also, then and only then call this self.authorize. Alright, then call self.authorize. So now this if has no else, because else is already defined here. You can have else, but you cannot override and have another message, so there's no returning back. So authorize is actually now going to do certain things. So let me first go and call this right from the view. Okay, now let's see how it goes. I'll just delete everything right here, so I don't want anything right here. Okay, I just want few things, so I'll just do them as per my own likings. So I'll create the first things first. When it's post, if the data is being posted to the accounts, right, class, and if it's being posted, right, so from login, if it's coming like this, right, what you do, post is fired, get is by default, you show him login.html, and on post, what you got to do, create an object of model. So we'll have to import it first, right? So we'll have to import it. So we will say from travel app dash models import, what class is there? Users. I'm importing this users class now, and I will make an object of user. So I'll say user is equivalent to user. So I'm making an object of users and say user dot username, right? What is user dot username? So I'll say user.username is equivalent to the post of txt username, and I will say user.password is equivalent to request.post, or I'll just copy paste this, request.post of the password. So now that first thing is done. What do you want now? You want to check whether username password is genuine and display the message as usual. So I don't have to do anything dramatic right here. Alright, what I do now here is I create an object of ACC is equivalent to accounts. So I create an object of class accounts, so now which is small accounts. I may have to import it, right? Because I will say from travel app dot business services dot accounts controller import account. So now I've imported account from travel app dot business services dot accounts controller. So travel app is the name of the package or the app, business services is the folder, and inside that there is a file known as accounts controller, and from that we are importing a class which is accounts. Now you can clearly see a class which is accounts is being imported. Alright, then let's go. And then what we are going to do is use the same here. So I'll say IACC is equivalent to accounts, and now pass your object user to the accounts object. So I'll say you call acc.login, and what do you pass? User. Alright, and now we still have to return something back to the function. Let me, for the sake, for 5 minutes, just to check messages, return return login.html, but I want some message to be shown. So I will say user.message. So I'll just pass the same user.message, because what you are doing, creating an object of user, right? Passing username and password to the username, and what are you going to do? Pass it to the login. Login gives you message. Where is the message? It's in the user.message. So that's what we are displaying, user.message right here. Okay, no error. It should work like it used. Now you can see, please write a username and password. You can clearly see right here the code we wrote earlier and the code that's written now. There's a hell of difference. Incorrect username and password. If I write correct, so I'm not doing anything. Even if I write correct, I'm not doing anything. Password, right? So now you are going to redirect the user here to some page. You're going to read discipline, sir. And now what we are going to do right here is render the application, and this rendering is going to happen from the accounts controller right here, right? And now we're not doing anything in the authorize, right? So authorize function में कुछ हो नहीं रहा है. So what are we going to do here is actually pass the request and the response object. Okay, let's create it here. Go back to models and create HTTP, or let's say from Django.http import HTTP request. So I'm importing HTTP request. Now why do I import HTTP requests? You'll come to know, because we have to use it, right? It is meant to be used, all right? And how? Or maybe not only the request, but the HTTP response is also meant to be used here. I'll first go to my right here. So I'll say I will make an object request. I call this as request, and the type of this request is going to be HTTP request. Okay, so let's call this response response, and the type is going to be okay, let's call this as HTTP response. Now what we are going to do here because we have to redirect the user no. So what are we going to do here? We created an object of request and we have created an object of response. And now let's fire the request and let's fire the response. Okay, let's go back to accounts controller. Now first go to view. We'll go to view. Why do you have to go to view? What is the requirement here? I'll tell you what is the requirement. Alright, so the requirement actually is we need a request. I repeat, you know what we are doing here, I'll show you this. We are returning the rendered response and we are also taking request object. So the request object is explicitly available in the view, but the request object won't be available in the accounts controller. I require request object here. Authorized function should get access to the request object of the same view page. That means we have to pass a request of this view page, right, and we'll have to forward it to this login controller, right? It's instead of passing it separately, what I do, right, I pass it in the object itself. So right, wait one second. All right, so now we have to pass this request. Now how do you pass? I will say user dot request is equivalent to request, right? We're passing this request to user, which is the object of users dot request that we just created, right? Request is of type HTTP request and response is of type HTTP response. We pass it just like we pass username, we pass password, right? We also pass user.request, the request that is available in the view page, right? So now request is available here in the authorized function as well. Now what we can do, we can take leverage and use of this request in the authorized function. And how do you take that, right? Let's see. Now I will say, instead of pass, I will say users dot request. So it's already there, users dot request, right? And now I'll say dot session, because how do you access session? Request dot session. Now you can clearly see request dot session, but request is available here only in the view page. I'm passing request to the object of users dot request, and now if I go to accounts controller, I can access it, users dot request dot session session. And what is the name of the session? And that is auth. I want to start this auth session, and auth session is going to take in it users dot user name. Not only that, I want to return back, right, I want to return back http res. So I'll have to import it. I will say from Django dot http import http response. So I will give response back, right? After starting the session, I'm returning back http response as profile/profile. That means please redirect me. Returning an http response I'll have to import http response redirect. Okay, from Django.http import http response redirect. So I say returning back to this authorized function http response redirect. Now if everything goes fine, what are you going to do, right? I will say return back to the login function self.authorize, right? What is authorize returning? Creating a session, returning you to the URL as an http response. You have to get redirected after the login is over. That means if it's valid, if it is authentic, that means the login is successful, right? That means the user has written something, and here the user name and password that user has written is actually genuine, right? So now let's forward. Okay, all right. What time is left? Okay, so now everything is going fine. That means now when you call this authorized function, when is this authorized call? If the user has written something, if that something is valid, means it is correct, username matches an IT and password matches password, then you are returning self.authorize. What does it return? It returns you a response redirect. That means as a response, you're getting redirected to profile, which is again in turn returned to this login. That means this login has now something in return, right? But what if the login is not successful? What do you return? Now here I can clearly see what I return back is right here, else here, and what I return back of else or first if is here. That means if the username and password that user has entered is not valid, right, what you are going to do is, let me take this message here. So let me not have the message there. Let me take the message here. If the username and password user has entered is not valid, I'll take this message right here. This function will only do return true and return false, and this message will go here, users.message is equivalent to something like this, and what I do is return the rendered response. So I'll say return render. Right, so I'll have to go back and see the package here used for rendering. I'll import again from Django.shortcuts, import render and import redirect. Okay, so now in that case, if is valid returns false, user.message, you're setting the message, please write a username and password, and you are returning the rendered response, which is render. What is the response, right? You are getting the request object. So where is the request? So user.request, because render takes request. If I show you, what does render take? It takes a request object. Where is the request coming from here? All right, so the request is already set in users model already has request, and you can clearly see, and it already has response. That's why I ask user to give me the object of users and return back. In case if there is something wrong, you remain in the page login.html. You don't go anywhere but remain in login.html, and with the message, right, you can say user.get user.message. I'll copy this, right? And the second else, if the username and password is not valid, what are you going to do? You say user.message. I'll just copy this message of incorrect username and password. That means if user.password does not match, username and password does not match, it returns false. But the message is actually not being displayed here. The message will be displayed here. All right, so inside else block is what you need to be inside else block. Okay, and now you again go back to login. That means if username and password is not entered at all, return is valid function actually returns false, right? In that case, you are going to display a message, please write a username and a password, and user remains in the login page, is not redirected, and the message is being displayed, right? And what is this message being displayed? Users.message as message, M-E-S-S-A-G-E, message. What is this message being displayed as? M-E-S-S-A-G-E, message, right? It is a dictionary key and a value pair that you're passing. Right? If everything goes fine, then you're returning back to the login function self.authorize. That means in all the ways login is getting something. If there is no validity, you return, remain in the login page and give this message, please write a username and password. If is authentic returns false, incorrect username and password message is displayed, and you remain in login. And in that case, if everything is fine, you're returning self.authorize. What self.authorize does is it actually creates a session, right? It actually creates a session and redirects you as an HTTP response redirect to profile. Now, what I do here in the view, I know that I have to return something back to the view, right? That is why I am returning back to the view acc.login. Now I return back accounts.login, which actually returns you either login.html with a different message, or it's going to return you the return of self.authorize which is the HTTP response redirect to the profile system. It's as simple as anything. Let me go to views and see there's nothing is hard coded here. See how simple the code can be and how simple the code is now. Now let's try it from the beginning. Now I go to login. Okay, I get an error, maybe indentation error, who knows. So I'll just check invalid syntax. So response has an invalid syntax. Response has an invalid syntax right here, and I'm getting some calls right here. Okay, let me go back and check this error in the model. So we have HTTP response. Where is the error? Response C user Django travel modules, line number 12. Line number 12 has an error. Why does it have an error? RESPONSE as HTTP response. It should not have any error. Okay, so let me just start the server once again. After starting the server, let me try logging in. Okay, now we don't have any error. Let's try. Please write a username and a password. I write an IIT and I write password as password. Right, and now you can clearly see if I write wrong username and password, I get incorrect username and password if I don't write anything. And now if I write correct username and correct password, I get an error. Function has no attribute get. Why? Response. So which function? Okay, you're still at login, but you should be able to get redirected to profile, right? Yeah, I should be able to get redirected to profile without carrying any message, right? And if I go back to profile now, alright, so let's try again. If I go directly to profile, no, the session has not started. Maybe there's some spelling mistake in this session. Auth session. So what session are we starting here? Yes, we are starting auth session, right? And it takes user.username and you are being forwarded to the profile. It works absolutely fine. No khalda. So did we. All right. So everything is fine. So we don't have any problem here. Alright, so let me try and see the error first. So login, if I log in, please add a username and password. So incorrect username and password, and if I write the correct username and password, we should be redirected. Yeah, that means there is no post attribute. Okay, so we are at login. Where are we calling this? We're calling this in login. Alright, are we calling this in login get or login post? Let's see. Get is here, so default URL and login URL. So I'll just delete this default URL and login URL. So once we call get of accounts, absolutely no problem. And then we call post. It has no problem. Now what problem is there then? I don't know. Accounts reveal an invalid login URL as view only accepts arguments that are attributes. Okay. Now we have an error here. Alright, so accounts get message is login here. Login.html is being rendered with a message is equal to message. I don't know an error here. So let me restart the server. Okay. That's I understood. Login URL and default URL. We were passing it somewhere. I don't know. Okay, now the server has started. You go to login. NIIT and password. Right, so function object has no attribute to get, which is Django.travel Python 31TIBS. But where is the exception? Function object has no attribute get. Which function has no attribute get? You should be able to get redirected to the profile system. Switch to copy and paste view. Okay, this is the error here. Exception tab attribute at login function object has no attribute get. Okay, so function attribute has no get object. So where are we going? We're actually going to profile. Authorize will return actually, yeah, it returns the profile system. So we're actually going to profile system. So okay, let me take it to profile. Let me save all. Alright, so let me go back to login and type NIIT and password. We still get this error. Click jacking.py in process. Line number 26. So where is line number 26? That means that the URL 22 has no post. But we're not posting anything. We're redirecting you to the profile system, my dear. You're not authorized and you're being redirected to the profile system. HTTP response, user.set request, and is being authorized. Request. Are we setting the request? Yes, we are setting the request. Creating an object of users, calling and returning ACC dot. Login and passing the same user object. It should not be any problem. I repeat, there is some kind of an indentation error maybe. Alright, an indent expected. So let me go and check for indentation error. So there may not be any other problem at all. Let me return back to the function without even testing anything. Let me return self dot authorize and I pass the object users. So let's see what happens. If I call the login function, let's see if it redirects to the users. Yeah, it's redirecting it fine. So we don't have redirection error. We have some indentation error. So let's see if self dot is valid users. If self dot is authentic users, return self dot. Otherwise, return the render of users dot request. So that's fine. request. Okay, I'll have to copy this. User.request is equal to request. So I'll have to forward it to users.request. I'll forward it to users.request and that's being forwarded with a message users.username and login.html, users.dash and login.html is actually fine. And see if we have some more errors or not. Let me go and indent them first of all. Maybe there's indentation errors and showing you false positive, right? And now this if is inside this if and return is inside this if and else is here. It should not be having any errors. Alright, let's see what we are doing. User.username, user.password, maybe spelling mistakes. So PASSWORD is password, USERNAME is username, MESSAGE is message, request.post. Okay, let's see this. Save is successful and I log in. Okay, so please write a username and a password. So I write username and password, NIIT and password is password. I log in, I still get an error. Let me clear this up. Alright, so we have caught the error. Now you can see that we're calling returning self.authorize. Now we forgot, I don't know, it does not show correct errors Django, but still you'll have to get them. Self.authorize is being called without passing an object users. Where is this users coming from? Because the object of users is what has session, means a request, right? If the request object is with the users object, which you are not passing in the authorize function. So I'll do this here. So I'll pass the users object, right? So that was the only error here. It just, I don't know, it was simply not responding. So now please write a username and password, incorrect username and password. Now if I write correct username and password, session is started and you are redirected back to the profile system. That's profile. Now you can access profile system and you're accessing the session. Now this is your accounts.py file which closed. Let me make you understand what is happening right from the beginning. First you go to profile system. Now for example, if I delete the session, if the session is not there, means the account means the login has not happened. If I go to profile directly, I'm thrown to login. So that's what's happening here. That means if you're trying to access a session variable, it creates an exception. In that case, right, if there's an exception, you get redirected back to the login page, right? And if there is no exception, you show the login page and try and fetch whatever is in the author, whatever is in the session will be fetched to this variable and will be displayed in the profile page. That is point number one. Point number two, you try and go to login, and now when you go to login, you're firing this class accounts, all right, because you're taking it as view, all right, and if I go to urls.py, now you can say whenever you type login, right, you take as view login URL is being defined and default URL is being defined. Let's say, but I'm not passing them at all. I'm just using them as view, and if I go to my views, so I'll not accept them here as well. So let's refresh. That absolutely fine. So now once you hit slash login, you are taking as view. As view means get will be fired by default and post explicitly. Now get is fired default. You're displaying login here, and that's what's being displayed here, login here. And now on post, you're creating an object of users, taking username and password from these two text fields, right, dropping them to the object user.username and user.password, and also the request, because you require request object somewhere. So that's why we have created the object of request and response as well. So we're passing everything. That means we're setting up the object. User has username, password, and request. Call accounts controller login function, and what this login function actually does, checks if the username and password is valid, means it's not empty, and then checks if it's authentic, means if it matches an ID and password. In that case, if it does not match, right, so you'll see incorrect username and password, and you remain in login.html. Why? Because you're returning back to the function the rendered response of your in the login page with the message, which is users.message incorrect username and password. If username and password has nothing written in it, then you display please write a username and password and return back to the function rendered response, means remaining at login.html. In that case, if everything is fine, you're returning self.authorize. Well, this self.authorize does is starts a session, and this is where you're fetching request. So that's why we are transferring request from view to this object. So this is where you're fetching the request right here and starting the session and returning back to the function HTTP response redirect. And now I'll close it down, close everything down. And now you can see this, how clean your get and post looks, how clean it is. And second hard-coded thing is something right here, right? So this is what we are going to get rid of. I'll again go to my accounts controller.py, and I will define a function here. I will say is authorized, right? So this function is authorized, is defined here. Right, and this function also takes an let's say about object of users. And now what this does is actually right, uses try and catch, and if there is an exception, we are returning right rendered response to profile.html. Okay, let me just use this. If there is not an exception, let me indent it first. Okay, in both the cases, right, if there is an exception, right, if you are checking whether the user is authorized or not, so I will use users.request, because request will come from users, so I'll say users.request. Alright, and now in this case you'll have to return HTTP response redirect back to the login page. Alright, so now what is happening here? Alright, you are actually USERS requires a keyword self. Fine. So now what you're doing, transferring from the session, you're transferring something here. Right, isn't it? You're transferring something from the session here. If in that case exception occurs, that means the session is not started, you're returning back to this is authorized function and HTTP response redirect back to the login page. In case if there is no exception, you go to profile page and carry the message SESS. So that's absolutely no problem. And this message is coming from the session actually. And now what are you going to do here? In the get, you will say return, right, and create an object. So we are going to create an object of accounts. So ACC is equal to account. So you're going to create an object, and what I do, you do to ACC dot is authorized, and you have to create an object of users is equal to users. So create an object of users and say user, and what you do is user dot let's say about request is equal to a request. Now you're passing request, and then you're passing the same object user to the is authorized function. Let's see now, no hard-coded material right here. You can clearly see there's nothing hard-coded. Now if I go to login here, if I directly go to profile, I'm redirected back to login. I can clearly see if I go to profile, get is fired, and I'm redirected back to login. And now if I log in with username and password, profile page works absolutely fine. And now another overhead that we have is actually what we are trying to do here is creating an object of accounts controller twice, 1 and 2 times its memory, that you're using memory, not using memory up to the extent possible. We know that the first thing that is fired in the class is a constructor. So I'll define an explicit constructor right here. Right, so this is what my constructor is, and I will again define let's say about ACC here. ACC is equal to none. I'm defining it as none. That means it has nothing initially. ACC, it's a class variable which has actually nothing at all, right? But what happens after you've called the constructor, which is automatically called when an object is made, you say ACC is equal to accounts, right? And this is the object you're creating only once. Accounts object, you're creating an object of accounts controller only once, right? But when an object of the class basically is created. So let me see. All right. Define init. What errors? We still get an error right here. I'll try and rectify it, right? So now we know that we have to define a constructor. It is very easy, right? But maybe because this is not the right place to create a constructor, maybe it may take self. Is that, yeah, this is what the error was. It does not have self. Okay, now instead of creating the account here, so we'll not create an account here. All right, we'll directly call ACC because the object of ACC is ready. We'll not create the object of accounts controller twice because the ACC is absolutely ready. Now you can see this is more object oriented for you. The moment the object of profile system, yani ki, it is basically created by the the handler, or it's actually created by Python itself, right? And we don't have to return ACC, so we'll have to now call self.acc, and here also we have to call self.acc. Okay, it should work fine now. What are we doing here? Creating the only object, creating object only once, right? So we can say self.acc is equal to accounts. Now we are solving the problem. ACC is a class variable that's been defined that gets, as soon as you call profile system, it creates an instance of accounts class and gives it to this ACC. That means this ACC is now available throughout the class. You're calling it from anywhere down here, right? Self.acc.isAuthorized is being called here, and returning self.acc.login is being called here as well. Okay, it should work fine, but we still have an error right here. Instance of accounts has no ACC member. It has self here. It has self here. I don't know. All right, ACC of type accounts. Okay, so let's see. I still get one error here. Return, we don't get this error here, return self.acc.isAuthorized, but we certainly get an error. So let's say return self.acc dot, so we have self.acc dot L capital login, LOGIN, and we pass user as an object right here. Okay, this is second class, okay, because we are using it in two classes. Yeah, it's not going to be available in the second class. I'll do the same here. Right, I will do the same here. Alright, so I'll do the same here because there are two classes. The constructor of first class will not be available to the constructor of second class. I do the same here. Okay, now it should work absolutely fine. Now let me try. Profile works fine. In case if there is no session, I'll go to my application and let's say there is no session. I try and delete. I go back. Now please write a username and password. Incorrect username and password, NIIT and password. So I go back to the profile. So this is the most beautiful component-based program that you have made using the complete object-oriented methodology and trying to reduce it up to the possible extent. Memory consumption is reduced, right? Object-oriented is being applied, business service is being separated. Every method has its own job. Authorize will only authorize, right? Valid will only check whether the user is valid. Right, authentic will only check the user is authentic, and you will see the magic tomorrow when we get connected to the database. You'll see that only one thing that we are going to change is authentic. Everything else will get the change reflected. Right, so this is a bond that we have created. Right, this is the beginning of object-oriented approach with web application development and engineering. Inshallah, will continue in the near future. We'll continue with more classes. Tomorrow will not be any class. I'll come with a new class on Wednesday most probably because the class has gone longer than expected. It's 1.5 hours class now. It may require you to practice a lot. Please practice a lot as it's going to be a real fun working with this kind of a project, inshallah, from day after tomorrow, right? And I know that you are very hard working guys and you will practice very hard, and good luck. Be in sync with me. See you guys day after tomorrow. Bye bye. Take care.